Hi there. Welcome to the replacement class that we're having for September 16th. And sorry again that I had to move things around on such short notice. So our topic in this clip is a tool that you'll be asked to use approximately 15,738 more times before you graduate. And it's called a SWOT analysis. SWOT is an acronym for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And on the face of it, a SWOT analysis is really a rather simple tool. It's based on a 2x2 matrix, and it's used to provide a snapshot of an entity. This entity can be a company, and it usually is in context of business studies, but it can just as effectively be used to analyze a region, a political organization, or even an individual person. For the purposes of this clip, though, I will stick to companies. Basically, there are two levels to a SWOT: the internal dimension and the external dimension. As you can see, the top two quadrants represent the internal dimension, while the two lower quadrants focus on the external dimension. The internal dimension showcases a company's major strengths and its major weaknesses. An example for a company's strength might be flat decision-making structures, which allow best-of-industry response times to consumer requests. While a weakness, on the other hand, could be an employee survey that shows that 70% of the staff is dissatisfied with working conditions. In both cases, you'll notice that the strength or weakness is a result of something that has already happened in the past, and that it is a characteristic of the company itself, not of anything outside the company. In contrast, the lower external dimension focuses on the status quo outside of the company. It looks at the major opportunities that await the company now and in the future, and it considers the major threats looming over the company. An opportunity might be: new research indicates a 200 million viewer market for on-demand Bud Spencer films. An example for a threat would be: 5 new coffee houses are expected to open in Fröschl in 2016. In practice, the distinction between internal and external isn't always clear-cut. For example, a factor like our production equipment ranks among the industry's top 5% in terms of speed is clearly an internal strength, as it's something that the company itself has created in the past. Similarly, market surveys forecast 20% growth for organic beauty products between 2015 and 2020 is clearly an external opportunity, because it's referring to demand that exists outside of the company. However, something like our share price is at an all-time high is a little more tricky. From a certain point of view, this can be seen as a strength that was created by the company. However, there are just as sound arguments for treating it as an opportunity, which leaves us with a gray area in some cases. Now, in your future business lives, it honestly won't be that important whether you list such an attribute under strengths or under opportunities, as long as you remain consistent in your methodology. Whoever reads the SWOT will be looking at all 4 quadrants anyway. On an academic level, however, I admit that a clear-cut distinction is highly important to some examiners, which is why I urge you from the very beginning of your studies to get in the habit of forming legitimate and above all consistent arguments for why you choose to view something as internal or external. Now you have an overview of the technique, which is simple enough. More importantly, though, I'd like to emphasize that the usefulness of a SWOT analysis depends exclusively on your discipline, on the level of research that you carry out, and on your creativity. If you excel in these areas, then a SWOT becomes a critical, perhaps the singularly most important framework for your medium and long-term planning. In contrast, if a SWOT analysis is something that you throw together in brief brainstorming style in a group meeting scenario, as most white-collar employees unfortunately do, it becomes nothing more than a time-eating source of bureaucracy that will ultimately limit rather than expand your view on what the company can be doing and should be doing. I'll tell you very openly that the vast majority of the SWOTs that I've seen in the last 15 years, be it in a company environment or as university projects, fall very clearly in the second category. The typical scenario is that a group of people will come together in a meeting environment at the beginning of a new project, and someone will suggest that, hey, let's do a SWOT. Someone else then walks up to a flip chart and writes down all the things that those people spontaneously think of at that specific point in time. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. There may be a little bit of fine-tuning later on, but even with that, most of the time, the final SWOT usually looks a lot like the outcome of those 20 minutes of a group meeting. Now, something like that isn't a useful planning tool. To be honest, in my opinion, it's more of a cross between kindergarten finger painting and group therapy. In fact, beyond being useless, SWOTs like that can actually harm a company. This is quite simply because once the SWOT is finalized, we tend to limit our creativity in planning to the confines of what is within those 4 quadrants. But why is a SWOT that's put together like that suboptimal? To my mind, there's 2 reasons. First of all, the best ideas and insights don't usually reveal themselves to us at the beginning of a thought process. They usually arrive after we've thought about something many times from multiple different angles, allowed those thoughts to settle, and then at a moment when you're least expecting it, when you're sitting in the car driving to work, when you're running on the treadmill, you suddenly have that one revelation that is truly remarkable, high quality. So if the majority of the thought that your team puts into a SWOT takes place in 15 to 20 minutes of a meeting, you'll identify all the obvious candidates, all the obvious strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But that's not really the point. You're looking for the non-obvious, and it's very, very unlikely that you'll be able to identify all of those with a type of haphazard approach like that. Don't misunderstand me. I do think that a group discussion of a SWOT is highly important. However, it has to be the final link in a chain. It can't be the only link. In my opinion, the group discussion ought to amount to about 10% of the total time people have spent diligently researching and thinking on the topic in advance. Then you'll generate output that will allow you to fully see the big picture rather than merely the obvious spotlights. My second reason for considering that this previously mentioned approach to SWOTs is suboptimal is that a lot of the input that is given in such circumstances is usually the result of either wishful thinking or, other extreme, of exaggerated gloom and doom worries. Neither are rooted in statistically significant, meaningful empirical data. When you see non-specific statements in a SWOT analysis, such as, there will be growing market demand for XYZ, or we have excellent staff, be very wary. More often than not, this is an indicator that very little genuine research has been put into the SWOT. And that means that the SWOT may very likely be a collection of generalizations that could be accurate, but may not be accurate at all. And in the case of your own SWOTs, be better. Look at the available reports, surveys, and forecasts on an industry or on a product. Obtain as much hard data on your competitors as you can so that you can accurately benchmark your company's position against it. If there is specific information that you would need but can't find by yourself at an adequate level of accuracy, talk to a good info broker or a market research agency. If the quality they offer is high enough, the return on your investment will probably be worthwhile. If you take this advice, then obviously putting together a SWOT is a lot more work than most people commonly take. But on the plus side, you'll be left with SWOTs that on one single page allow you to see the big picture of all the major forces that are in play concerning the company's future. And that, in turn, will allow you to formulate long, medium, and even short-term strategies that propel you clearly towards your mission. As our next assignment, I'd like you to begin working on SWOTs in your individual groups. By now, each group has taken steps towards identifying a mission, one or more customer target groups, and a product mix that consists of one or more goods and or services. When putting together a SWOT, I'd like you to spend the majority of your time on identifying opportunities and threats. Since you don't have real companies yet, you can be more creative with the internal dimension. You have the discretion to select strengths and weaknesses that you think would fit to whatever type of company structure you envision. What's important to me here, though, is that you remain as consistent as possible. For example, if you decide that your company will be a multinational player with divisions and factories set up around the world, there are many typical strengths and weaknesses that go hand in hand with that. In the same manner, if you decide that your company will be a one-shop service provider located in the city of Leoben, Austria, well, then there are similarly some strengths that you can expect and some weaknesses that go hand in hand with that. Your SWOT will be a work in progress over the next 2 months, and it may cause you to rethink certain decisions you've already made about your customers or about your products. That's entirely acceptable. In fact, that's one of the processes a SWOT is supposed to spark. But what I truly urge you in the first month of your business studies is to firmly establish the habit of dedicating enough research and creativity to this important tool. There are admittedly areas in your businesses and in your education where you'll have to cut corners to save time. But a SWOT should never be one of them. Either do it right or don't do it at all. Rock and roll.